When the last bomb falls, and it always does, who answers for the child who didn't make it to the shelter in time? I want you to sit with that question for a second, because everything I'm about to tell you flows from it, not from maps, not from missile counts, not from press briefings, from that question. We are now, right now, today, watching something unfold in the Middle East that I have spent the better part of 30 years warning people about. And I'll be honest with you, I take no satisfaction in being right. None, because being right about something this catastrophic just means more people are dead and more people are going to die. Let me tell you what has actually happened, and more importantly, what it means for your life, for your family's life, and for every family on this planet that has nothing to do with the politics of Tel Aviv or Tehran. Israel has stepped over a very dangerous line with Iran. And by dangerous, I don't mean the word the way politicians use it, as a kind of theatrical warning, something you say to sound serious before the cameras. I mean dangerous the way a man who has spent 31 years in uniform means it. I mean, we are in territory now where the margins for error have essentially disappeared, and the people making the decisions seem either not to understand that or, and this is what keeps me up at night, they understand it perfectly and have decided they don't care. Now, let me tell you about a family in Tehran. I don't know their names, but statistically, right now, we know from health ministry figures that over 3,000 people have been killed in Iran since this all began in late February. 3,468 as of the last count I saw. And those numbers are always behind reality. Among them, 7 infants, 376 children. People whose names will never make it onto a single American news ticker, a grandmother who survived the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s and made it to her 80s before an airstrike ended her life, a father who worked a night shift at a gas facility and never came home. These are the human beings at the center of this story. They are not abstractions. They are not collateral. They are people. And on the other side, because I want to be honest, as I always try to be, Israelis have died too. 26 confirmed killed as of this week, nearly 8,000 wounded, families in Dimona running to shelters when the alerts go off, a city that sits next to Israel's main nuclear facility. Let me say that again, a city that sits next to Israel's nuclear facility taking Iranian missiles. You tell me that doesn't make your stomach turn. Now, let me pull back a little and give you the strategic picture, because the human story and the strategic reality are inseparable here. They're the same story. What Israel did on February 28th, along with the United States, was launch nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours. 900. That's not a surgical operation. That's not a targeted response. That's a war, a full-scale war. And the stated objectives: regime change, destroying Iran's nuclear program, decapitating military leadership. Those aren't limited military objectives. Those are the objectives of an empire that has decided it is done negotiating. The supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, was killed in those strikes. Think about that for a moment. Whatever you thought of the man, whatever his government did or didn't do, his killing represented something profound and dangerous. The removal of the central figure around whom an entire nation state's deterrence calculations were organized. When you do something like that, you don't create a vacuum, you create chaos. And chaos in a country that has sophisticated ballistic missiles that sits astride the Strait of Hormuz, the artery through which 20% of the world's oil passes every single day. Chaos there doesn't stay in Tehran. It comes to your gas station. It comes to your grocery store. It comes to the mortgage payment you're trying to make. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. They attacked U.S. military installations across the region in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Oman. They struck energy infrastructure. They attacked commercial shipping lanes. NATO forces were scrambling to shoot down Iranian drones near a base in Turkey. The conflict spread, as conflicts always do when the initial strikes are too big to contain, into Lebanon, where the fragile ceasefire with Hezbollah shattered like glass. Now, here's what I really need you to understand, because this is where this goes from being a Middle East conflict to being something that threatens the architecture of everything we built after World War II. Israel then struck Iran's South Pars gas field in March, the largest natural gas field in the world, and Iran threatened to strike energy facilities across the Gulf. We now have a conditional ceasefire declared in early April, mediated by Pakistan of all people. And as of this week, Tehran has suspended ceasefire negotiations because of continued Israeli military strikes in Lebanon yesterday. The Washington Post had it yesterday morning. The talks are teetering. So we are in a moment where a ceasefire exists on paper and is being systematically undermined in practice. And that is exactly the most dangerous moment, not the moment of open war, but the moment where one side keeps pushing inside the formal architecture of a ceasefire, betting the other side will absorb the hits and not respond. That bet has been wrong before in human history. It will be wrong again. Now, I have to say something about the nuclear dimension, because if I don't, I'm not doing my job. I've been on the record for months warning that Israel has nuclear weapons, and that if this conflict reaches a point where Israeli leadership believes the state itself is existentially threatened, the use of those weapons becomes thinkable. Not inevitable, I want to be clear about that, but thinkable. And thinkable is too far. When you're talking about nuclear weapons in a densely populated region, thinkable is already a catastrophe. At the same time, Iran, which did not have a nuclear weapon when this started, is now, by nearly every serious analyst's assessment, closer to having one. Because that is what happens when you bomb a country's nuclear facilities and kill its scientists and leave the nation's security establishment convinced that the only real deterrent against further attack is the one weapon that makes attack unthinkable. We may well have produced the outcome we claimed we were trying to prevent. That is the cruel irony of strategic miscalculation at this scale. And I'll tell you something else that isn't being said loudly enough. For 30 years, I served this country. I believe in this country. And I watched us build, imperfectly, yes, but genuinely, something called an international legal order after the Second World War. Rules, institutions, frameworks that said nations cannot simply strike other nations because they deem it necessary. That legal order has been shredded. We violated it with these strikes. We violated it when we killed the Iranian supreme leader during diplomatic talks, while negotiations were literally underway in Geneva. That's not a legal technicality. That's a declaration to every nation on earth watching. The rules don't apply when Washington decides they don't. And every nation watching is now drawing its own conclusions about what that means for their own security. China is drawing conclusions. Russia is drawing conclusions. The global South is drawing conclusions. And when 3/4 of the world is watching and calculating, what they're calculating is whether to accelerate their departure from the dollar, from American-led institutions, from the military alliances and trade relationships that have underwritten American power for 80 years. This war, and I use that word now without qualification, this war is not just being fought with bombs. It's being fought in currency markets and shipping lanes, in the quiet conversations between Beijing and Riyadh, between Moscow and New Delhi, about what comes next. I want to be straight with you about something personal. I worked for Colin Powell. I was there for the Iraq War. I sat in that administration and watched smart, serious people convince themselves that the logic of force was sound, that the risks were manageable, that the international community would come around once the mission was accomplished. I watched what came after, the hundreds of thousands of dead, the regional destabilization that is still playing out today, 20 years later, the credibility lost that has never been recovered. I am watching the same logic operate right now at a scale that dwarfs Iraq. And the people prosecuting this war in Washington and Tel Aviv, they are not evil people, most of them. They are people who have convinced themselves that the risks are manageable. They are wrong. I was wrong then too, for too long. I know what that looks like from the inside. So here is what I want to say to you directly, as plainly as I know how. You cannot afford to look away from this. Not because I'm asking you to panic, and not because I'm asking you to pick a side in the way cable news wants you to. I'm asking you to be an informed citizen of a democracy that is right now spending your money and your military power and your country's reputation on a war that was never debated in Congress, never authorized under the Constitution you were taught in school, and whose consequences are rippling through every part of the global economy you live in. Call your representatives, not as a political act, but as a civic one. Demand that Congress reassert its constitutional authority over the decision to make war. That is not a radical ask. That is the most basic thing the founders insisted on because they knew they had lived through it, what happened when one person or one government could make the decision to go to war alone. Seek out voices that aren't on the side of any government. Read the independent analysts. Read the people in Iran and in Israel who are trying to stop this. Read the economists who are modeling what a prolonged Hormuz disruption does to the global food supply. Read the nuclear security experts who are losing sleep right now. And for the love of God, don't let the noise and the speed of this news cycle make you numb. The 8-month-old who died in Iran was a real baby. The Israeli grandmother who ran for a shelter and didn't make it was a real woman. The Pakistani mediator sitting in a room right now trying to hold a ceasefire together with baling wire and prayer. That is a real human being doing an incredibly hard thing on behalf of all of us. History is going to look back at this moment and ask what we did when it mattered, not what government did, what we did, what kind of citizens we were, what we demanded, and what we let slide because we were tired or busy or just overwhelmed by all of it. I'm tired too. I'm 80 years old. I've been sounding alarms for 30 years about where this logic was heading, but I am not done, and I don't think you are either. The line has been crossed. Now, the only question is what comes next. And that more than any missile system, more than any ceasefire negotiation, more than any presidential decision, and that depends on us.